When the Bulls traded their most valuable asset in Alex Caruso, one of the best defensive players in the game of basketball and was quickly becoming one of the better 3-and-D players in the league, but when they traded Alex Caruso for Josh Giddey, and only Josh Giddey, no additional draft capital, there was an uproar and outcry from Bulls fans that this was the return the Bulls got for a player who had been reported to garner multiple first-round picks from teams around the league, some even reporting that first-round picks were on the table for Alex Caruso prior to the trade deadline in 2024. But the Bulls hung on to AC past the deadline in an attempt to make a playoff push, which of course failed, as the Bulls would fail to get out of the play-in. And because Josh Giddey had struggled in the postseason and really had an up and down year with the Thunder as they started to emerge as one of the up-and-coming contending teams in the NBA, and it was becoming clear with the ascendance of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and him being the primary ball handler that Giddey wasn't going to be a good fit for that team long-term. And because of all this, fans hated this trade. And I'll admit, even myself included, although I didn't think it was as bad as a lot of fans, even media members of the media, were making it out to be. I didn't like the trade because I thought they should have been able to get more in return for Alex Caruso, especially from a team like the Thunder that has more draft picks than they know what to do with. But I wasn't as down on Josh Giddey as a player like so many people were. I mean, you're talking about a 21-year-old player, at that time anyway, that was the starting point guard for the number 1 seeded team in the Western Conference, and a guard with size who can rebound well, great court vision, and one of the more gifted passers in the game. Yes, he had a lot of flaws, most notably his defense and his shooting, as well as him being prone to turnovers. But for a 21-year-old player that was already a well-established player in the league that had some upside, a playmaking guard which the Bulls desperately needed, yeah, I was willing to give it a shot. Would I have liked to see a better return for Alex Caruso? Absolutely, but Josh Giddey, in my view, was not some garbage player that is a net negative on the court like so many people were making him out to be. Now, when Giddey first started off the season, and you saw those turnovers tick up, he was horrible at finishing around the rim, his shooting didn't appear to progress at all, his defense was just as lackluster, and you thought, alright, maybe this isn't going to work. And it's worse because you now have to decide on whether you're going to pay this guy who is going to be a restricted free agent this summer. But as the season has progressed on, and especially since the Bulls traded away Zach LaVine and Giddey has played a more prominent role on offense, Josh has stepped up big time and is proving all of the doubters wrong. And dare I say it, could even be making a case for why he does in fact deserve a big contract extension and a potential piece the Bulls can build with for the future. But the challenge is, the Bulls really have a tough decision to make when it comes to their cap sheet this summer and financial implications of extending Giddey to a long-term deal. And even more tough is that the Bulls are more than likely going to have to choose between Josh Giddey and Coby White beyond this season, with Coby being extension eligible, as he's certainly going to command more money than the $12.8 million he's owed next season given his production and value on the market, especially with the rising rate of the cap and the amount being around the mid-level exception currently. But what if I told you there's a really good reason for why the Bulls should actually keep Josh Giddey over Coby White if they do in fact have to choose between those two, and why Giddey may be worth more than what you would expect? Well, let's talk about it. So what's going on, everyone? You're listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. Apologies, by the way, that my content hasn't been as frequent as you're used to seeing, to be honest, because we all know this season is a bit of a wash, and we're just waiting for the draft lottery at this point. I probably won't be doing post-game videos for every game, especially when I have evening activities and sports that my kids take part in, but don't worry, I'll get things back up and running once the off-season hits, and of course, I'll still be putting out content on my NBA channel, M1 Hoops. You can check that out. A link to that can be found in the description. Now, I want to share some numbers on Josh Giddey because we all know he's been playing some of his best basketball right now. But just how good has that actually been? Well, Josh Giddey in the month of February has been averaging 19.8 points per game, 8.1 rebounds, and 5.1 assists, 1.4 steals, and 1.2 blocks. And he's doing all this on some insane shooting splits of 50-52, who said he couldn't shoot threes, right? But 52 from three-point range and 86% from the free throw line, with a true shooting percentage of 66%. That is insane efficiency for a player that has always been labeled as an inefficient scorer who can't shoot and can't finish at the rim. And then, for all of those advanced stats gurus who have been yelling about how Josh Giddey puts up empty stats on a bad team, and when you break down his advanced numbers, more specifically his on-off numbers and box plus minus, and now he's always in the negative and doesn't impact winning, well, guess what? In the month of February, Josh Giddey has a +8 point net rating when he's on the court. A +8 when he's on the court, despite the Bulls losing most of their games in the month of February. Some of them bad losses as well, but when he's on the court, they've been 8 points better. Now, I know some will say, well, that's a small sample size, only 9 games that they've played in February, but to a lot of people's surprise, even though the Bulls have been bad this season, they've lost a lot of games, which negatively impacts a player's box plus minus ratings and on-off numbers when your team in general just isn't that good. But Josh Giddey for this season, on the season, he has a plus 1.6 box plus minus, which is actually the highest of his career and the second highest box plus minus on the Bulls, only behind Nikola Vucevic, as well as second most in win shares on the team at 3.1, again, only behind Vuce. So no, I'm not saying Giddey is a perfect player. I'm not even saying he's going to be some kind of all-star in the making, but I don't want to hear all of these arguments about how he's a net negative on the court and doesn't impact winning, because as of late, he's been one of the few players that is actually showing up well since the Zach LaVine trade, and has also been playing with effort and hustle, which is more than what I can say for about half the guys on the roster. Now, you contrast that with Coby White, who, yes, I know has been out of the lineup a bit more recently. He's obviously still dealing with some nagging injuries, and yes, he's obviously been guarded differently by opposing teams now that the Bulls no longer have their number 1 scoring option in Zach LaVine. But Coby White more recently, and you could even say for the season, has been pretty underwhelming. Very inconsistent with his shooting at times, the effort hasn't been there, the decision making on the court has regressed a bit, and his overall efficiency paints a very different picture from what we've been seeing from Josh Giddey. First of all, if you can believe it, Coby White is actually now below Josh Giddey in 3-point percentage on the season. Much higher volume shooting for Coby, obviously, but still, lower field goal percentage as well, and his shooting splits in February have been especially bad at 37, 37, and 97. He's been money from the free throw line. You got to give him props for that. But if you want to go by the advanced metrics and comparing it to that of Josh Giddey, it paints an even grimmer picture, where Coby has had one of the worst box plus minuses on the roster at negative 2.2 and a net rating when he's on the court of negative 6. To put it in simpler terms, the Bulls this season have been better when Josh Giddey is on the court than when Coby White is. Now, the biggest question is, and why I think this is going to be very interesting to see how the Bulls approach this summer, but obviously Giddey is a restricted free agent, restricted meaning he can go out and get offers from other teams, and the Bulls would have the ability to match any offer sheet within 24 hours in order to retain him. But under the new CBA rules, incumbent teams now have the ability to start negotiating extensions with their own free agents before the free agency period opens. And if you remember, that's what the Bulls did last season with Patrick Williams when they signed him to that 5-year, $90 million contract. They reached that deal before July 1st to prevent Williams from getting any offers on the open market and run the risk of having to match a big offer sheet that they couldn't afford. Now, in hindsight, the Bulls were likely just bidding against themselves, which we've seen them do before, as there weren't that many teams that had cap space to even offer Patrick a big extension. And so it makes you wonder, will the Bulls do that to themselves again with Giddey's impending free agency, or will they wise up this time, understand that there aren't going to be that many teams that have cap space to offer Giddey a massive contract, or teams that aren't plainly in the market for a player like Giddey's services, and rather than signing him to a large contract before free agency opens, let him test the market, let them have the leverage and control of matching any offer, and letting the market dictate his value. Because look, as good as Giddey has been, and I like him as a player because he plays hard, you can't pay Giddey upwards of $30 million per year, or God forbid a max contract extension. That would be a disaster. However, you are going to have to pay up for Josh Giddey. That's just the fact of the matter. And you know the Bulls are going to re-sign him because they pursued him so heavily in that Alex Caruso trade, for better or for worse. So I do think that if you could get Giddey in the $20 million to $25 million a year range, that's a fair deal, and something the Bulls should do when you stack it up against his production, age, and potential. I mean, if you can get Josh on a 5-year, $100 million deal, that's a really good value, especially when you consider the fact that towards the end of the deal, that would be close to the mid-level with the rise in the salary cap, and the fact that Giddey will be in the peak of his prime at the age of 27 at that time. But I could even live with it going all the way up to 5 years, $125 million, so $25 million a year. I would be uneasy about it, but I could live with it because it's still an overall small percentage of the cap going into future seasons. Anything more than that is where it's going to get complicated, because say a team does in fact offer him $30 million a year or higher. That's going to be a tough pill for the Bulls to swallow, knowing that contract is going to hamstring their cap sheet for the foreseeable future for a player who is good, but he's not an all-star level player. And you can't pay a non-star in this league star level money. We've seen so many instances where that has come back to bite teams, especially in this new CBA environment. I do think the Bulls are going to be a bit more cautious though, especially after the challenges they went through in trying to move off of Zach LaVine's contract. But regardless of where they land in a contract extension with Josh Giddey, even if it's at a reasonable rate of $20 million a year, I just don't see how they can extend Kobe to a long-term deal as well. Now, Kobe does still have one more year left on his current contract, so it's not like he's going to be a free agent this summer, and it's a bargain contract where he's only going to be making $12.8 million. The Bulls could hold on to Kobe for next season and try and trade him before the deadline, but knowing he's likely going to command a contract similar in range to that of Josh Giddey, you're just not going to be able to justify from a financial perspective paying both Giddey and Kobe big money on long-term deals. You need to add defensive guards, and hell, if anything, you need to consolidate your heavy guard lineup and put together some wings and bigs. You can't keep putting together a 6-point guard lineup. So anyway, I think that's going to be the biggest question. The most challenging decision the Bulls are going to have going into this offseason is choosing between Giddey and Kobe White, and how much they should be investing in either of these guys depending on the direction they take. But I would love to hear what you guys think. You let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.